The first Saturday of October arrived quietly. Autumn had settled over Maple Street. The maple trees that lined the sidewalks had begun exchanging their green leaves for shades of gold, amber, and crimson. Every gentle breeze carried another handful of leaves drifting slowly toward the ground, covering the sidewalks like a warm quilt stitched together by nature. The old white house at the end of the street looked just as welcoming as it always had. Its porch light still turned on every evening. Elizabeth's roses, though fewer now, continued blooming beneath the kitchen window. Neighbors often smiled as they walked past. Some would even pause for a moment, not because someone lived there anymore, but because the house had somehow become a place that reminded people to slow down, to wave, to ask a neighbor how they were doing, to remember birthdays, to write letters. One house had quietly changed an entire neighborhood, and it all began with one man who believed kindness never needed an audience. Nearly a year had passed since the first Henry Collins Kindness Day. It had become a tradition. Every month, volunteers gathered at Henry's house to write letters, bake bread, repair fences for elderly neighbors, or simply share coffee with someone who had been alone for too long. No television cameras ever came. No newspapers wrote stories about it. No one expected recognition. That was exactly how Henry would have wanted it. Inside the old house, the familiar scent of vanilla and coffee still lingered in the kitchen. David unlocked the front door while Noah carried 2 cardboard boxes. "What are those?" David asked. "The attic." Noah smiled. "I figured it's finally time." David laughed. "I've been saying that for months." "I know. I've been pretending not to hear." The attic had become something of a family joke. Every time they cleaned another room, they postponed the attic. Not because it was difficult, because it felt like opening the last chapter of Henry's life. Today, they were finally ready. Dust floated through the narrow attic window as David switched on the light. Rows of carefully labeled boxes stretched along both walls. Christmas decorations, old fishing equipment, Elizabeth's sewing supplies, family photo albums. Everything had been organized with the same quiet care Henry used in every part of his life. He labeled everything. Noah laughed. Grandpa even labeled empty boxes. David smiled. That sounds like him. For the next 2 hours, father and son sorted through decades of memories. An old baseball glove David thought he'd lost as a teenager. Elizabeth's recipe cards tied together with faded blue ribbon. A tiny pair of baby shoes that had belonged to David. Noah carefully held them. "They're so small." David smiled. "You were smaller." "I know, but not that small." They laughed together. Moments like these no longer hurt the way they once had. Missing Henry still brought tears. But now, the tears were usually followed by smiles. Grief had softened into gratitude. Near the back corner of the attic stood Henry's old writing desk. It wasn't fancy, just a solid oak desk worn smooth by thousands of evenings spent writing letters beneath a small reading lamp. Noah immediately recognized it. "Grandpa wrote here every Thursday." David nodded. "I always thought he was paying bills." So did I. Together, they carefully carried the desk downstairs. They placed it beside the living room window, where afternoon sunlight poured across its wooden surface. David opened the top drawer. Pens, stationery, unused stamps, everything exactly as Henry had left it. The second drawer contained envelopes arranged neatly by size. The third held old notebooks. David smiled. "I don't think your grandpa ever threw away a piece of paper." Noah ran his hand gently across the polished wood. Something felt unusual, near the back edge. His fingertips brushed against a tiny groove, almost invisible. He frowned. "Dad, this doesn't feel right." David leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It feels different." Noah pressed gently. Nothing happened. He pressed again. A soft click echoed inside the desk. Both of them froze. "What was that?" David whispered, very slowly. A narrow wooden panel slid open beneath the desktop. A hidden compartment. Neither of them spoke. They simply stared. Henry had never mentioned a secret drawer. Inside rested a single envelope. Nothing else. No photographs. No money. No journal. Just one cream-colored envelope, perfectly preserved, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. Noah reached for it carefully. The paper felt surprisingly smooth despite its age. Across the front, written in Henry Collins's unmistakable blue ink, were 6 simple words. For the little girl who believes no one sees her. No address, no name, no stamp, nothing. Only those 6 words. The room suddenly felt very quiet. David turned the envelope over. Still nothing. The seal remained untouched. He never mailed it, David whispered. Noah looked puzzled. Why not? I don't know. He mailed thousands of letters. Why would he keep this one? They stood in silence. Outside, a squirrel scampered across the front yard. Somewhere down the street, children laughed while riding bicycles. Life continued as usual. Yet inside Henry's house, time seemed to pause. Noah carefully placed the envelope on the desk. I don't think we're supposed to open it. David looked at him. You don't? No. If Grandpa wanted us to read it, he would have written our names. David nodded slowly. You're right. So what do we do? Noah looked again at the 6 handwritten words. His eyes lingered on the phrase, the little girl who believes no one sees her. Then he smiled gently. I think we find her. David blinked. You mean the girl? Noah nodded. If Grandpa wrote this, he believed she existed. And if she existed, maybe she's still waiting. David smiled. It was the kind of impossible idea Henry himself would have believed. Most people would have laughed. Henry never would have. He often said, hope begins the moment someone decides impossible isn't the end of the story. David picked up the envelope, held it carefully, almost reverently. You know, if anyone can find her, I think Grandpa already chose the right person. He smiled at Noah. That evening, Noah carried the unopened envelope into Henry's study. He placed it gently beside Grandpa's old fountain pen, beside the worn leather notebook, beside the stack of blank stationery. The 3 objects rested together. One represented the past, one represented the present, and one, a future no one yet understood. Before turning off the desk lamp, Noah noticed something written in tiny pencil letters beneath the envelope, almost invisible, as though Henry had added it at the very last moment. He leaned closer. The words were barely readable. Start where every letter begins. Noah stared at the sentence. He smiled. That's a clue. David looked over his shoulder. What do you think it means? Noah glanced toward Grandpa's fountain pen, then toward the old wooden mailbox visible through the window. Finally, he looked back at the envelope. I don't know yet, but tomorrow, we're going to find out. Outside, the autumn wind carried another shower of golden leaves across Maple Street. Inside the quiet little house, a journey had already begun. Not to deliver a letter, but to discover the one heart it had always belonged to. The following morning, Maple Street woke beneath a blanket of soft autumn fog. Golden leaves covered the sidewalks. The little white house seemed almost hidden behind the colorful maple trees. Inside, Noah couldn't stop thinking about the sentence Henry had penciled beneath the envelope. Start where every letter begins. He repeated it quietly while pouring cereal. What do you think Grandpa meant? David looked up from his coffee. If someone asked me that yesterday, I would have said, the mailbox. Noah smiled. But Grandpa didn't start his letters at the mailbox. David nodded. He started them. Long before that, after breakfast, they carried Henry's old writing box into the living room. Inside were stacks of cream-colored stationery, blue envelopes, wax seals, bottles of fountain pen ink, everything arranged with remarkable precision. Noah picked up one blank sheet. At the bottom, tiny gold letters read, Whitmore Stationery. David stared for a moment. I remember this. Grandpa refused to buy paper anywhere else. You've been there? When I was little, it was a tiny shop downtown. I haven't thought about it in years. 40 minutes later, they parked outside a narrow brick storefront tucked between an old bookstore and a family-owned florist. A weathered wooden sign hung above the entrance. Whitmore Stationery, the same sign Henry had seen for more than 30 years. Its paint had faded, but the little brass bell above the door still chimed exactly as it always had. The moment Noah stepped inside, he felt as though he'd entered another time. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with journals, leather notebooks, handmade paper, fountain pens, glass bottles of ink arranged like tiny jewels beneath warm lights. The air smelled faintly of cedar wood, paper, and fresh coffee. No computers, no loud music, only quiet. Behind the counter, An elderly gentleman carefully repaired an antique fountain pen using a magnifying glass. His white hair curled gently around his ears. Round spectacles rested low on his nose. Without looking up, he smiled. "Good morning. I'll be with you in just a moment." When he finally lifted his eyes, he noticed Henry's fountain pen tucked into Noah's shirt pocket. His hand stopped moving immediately. Then, he noticed the familiar navy blue coat folded over Noah's arm. His smile slowly disappeared. "Oh," he whispered. "So, the Collins family finally came." David smiled gently. "My father, Henry Collins." The old shopkeeper slowly removed his glasses. "I've been expecting you." David laughed softly. "You know, that's becoming a familiar sentence." The gentleman chuckled. Henry had that effect on people. "My name is Arthur Whitmore. My grandfather opened this shop in 1948. Henry became one of our very first regular customers." Arthur carefully unlocked the counter gate. "Please." "Cool, meh. I think your grandfather left something here." David and Noah exchanged surprised glances. "He left something?" Arthur smiled. "Oh yes, he always did." He guided them toward a small sitting room at the back of the shop. On one wall hung dozens of framed photographs. Writers, teachers, children proudly holding their first fountain pens. Near the center hung a photograph of Henry, standing beside Arthur, both smiling broadly. Henry held a small brown paper bag. Arthur held up an ink bottle. Beneath the photograph, a brass black reed, "The kindest customer we ever had." Noah couldn't help smiling. "Grandpa never told us about this." Arthur laughed. Of course he didn't. He would have been embarrassed. They settled around a small wooden table. Arthur poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. Then he looked toward Noah. "You found the letter." It wasn't a question. Noah nodded. "How did you know?" Arthur smiled. "Because Henry told me. If anyone ever walked in carrying his fountain pen, they would probably be looking for one unfinished letter." David leaned forward. "You knew about it?" Arthur nodded slowly. "I knew it existed. I never knew what it said." He opened a small drawer beneath the table. Inside lay an old ledger. The pages had yellowed with age. Arthur carefully turned them until he reached one particular entry. Then he slid the book across the table. "Customer, Henry Collins. Special order. 1 handmade envelope. 1 sheet of ivory cotton paper. Do not sell another like it." The date was 12 years earlier, the very same year Henry had passed away. Arthur looked thoughtfully at the ledger. "He asked me to make a single envelope. I asked why, only one." He smiled and said, "Because there will only ever be one child meant to receive it." Noah felt a chill run down his spine. Grandpa had planned this, long before anyone realized. David quietly asked, "Did he ever tell you who the little girl was?" Arthur slowly shook his head. "No," I asked. He simply smiled. Then he told me something I'll never forget. Arthur closed his eyes, as though hearing Henry's voice again. "Arthur, some letters don't belong to one person. They belong to the first heart that's ready to receive them." The room became silent. Noah looked toward the unopened envelope resting inside Grandpa's writing box. Perhaps the letter wasn't meant for someone Henry already knew. Perhaps it was waiting for the moment someone truly needed it. Arthur suddenly stood. "There's something else." He walked toward a tall cabinet filled with neatly labeled boxes. After searching for several moments, he returned carrying a tiny wooden case no larger than a jewelry box. Dust covered its lid. Across the top, written in faded ink, were 2 words, "Henry Collins." Arthur placed it gently before Noah. "He asked me to keep this for as long as necessary." Noah carefully opened the lid. Inside rested dozens of tiny paper slips. Every one contained a single handwritten sentence. "Someone needs encouragement today. Don't forget birthdays. Right before it's too late. Loneliness hides behind smiles. Every child deserves one adult who believes in them." There were hundreds of them, little reminders Henry had written to himself over the years. David smiled through tears. "He carried these with him?" Arthur nodded. "Every Thursday, whenever he didn't know who to write, he reached into this box, picked one, and somewhere, someone received a letter. Near the bottom of the box, Noah discovered one final folded note, different from all the others. It wasn't a reminder. It was a question, written in Henry's careful handwriting. Who was the child everyone forgot to notice today? Noah stared at the words. His heart suddenly felt heavy. Arthur quietly spoke. Your grandfather asked himself that question every single week. David whispered, I spent years thinking Dad changed lives. By writing letters. Arthur smiled gently. No, he changed lives. Because he noticed people. Just before they left. Arthur handed Noah a small envelope. There was one more thing. Henry asked me, if anyone came searching, to give them this. Across the front, Henry had written only one sentence. The librarian knows where I always looked first. Noah looked at David. Another clue. Another step. Another piece of Grandpa's unfinished journey. Outside, the autumn sun had finally broken through the morning clouds. The golden leaves sparkled beneath the light. Father and son climbed into the truck. The unopened letter rested safely between them. Still waiting. Still patient. Still searching. For the little girl who believed no one saw her. The Fairview Public Library stood at the center of town. It was an old red brick building with tall windows, wide stone steps, and two enormous oak trees shading the entrance. Henry had visited it every Thursday for more than 30 years. David remembered that now. His father would leave the house shortly after lunch with a leather writing case tucked beneath his arm. He always returned before supper. Whenever David asked where he had been, Henry gave the same answer. Just taking care of a few things. David had never questioned him. At the time, Thursday afternoons had seemed ordinary. Now he understood they had been anything but ordinary. Noah carried the unopened letter carefully inside Grandpa's writing box. David held the envelope Arthur Whitmore had given them. Across its front were Henry's words. The librarian knows where I always looked first. The brass doors opened quietly. Warm air greeted them. So did the familiar scent of old books, polished wood, and paper that had passed through many hands. The library was peaceful, but not silent. Pages turned. A printer hummed softly. A little boy whispered to his mother near the children's shelves. Somewhere upstairs, a wooden chair scraped gently across the floor. Noah looked around. Grandpa must have loved this place. David smiled. He loved anywhere people could sit, without being asked why they were alone. Behind the main desk sat a woman with silver hair cut neatly above her shoulders. She wore a dark green cardigan and reading glasses attached to a thin gold chain. Her name tag read, Clara Bennett, head librarian. She was stamping a stack of returned books when David approached. Excuse me. Clara looked up and smiled. How may I help you? David placed Arthur's envelope on the desk. We're Henry Collins's family. The stamp slipped from Clara's hand. It landed softly against the wooden counter. Her eyes moved immediately toward Noah, then to Henry's fountain pen in his pocket, then to the old navy coat folded over his arm. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, she whispered, You found the letter. Noah nodded. You know about it too. Clara removed her glasses. I knew Henry had written something important. He never showed it to me, but during his final year, he asked me a question almost every Thursday. What question? David asked. Clara looked toward the far end of the library, beyond the reading tables, past the history shelves. Beside a tall window overlooking the courtyard, sat a small wooden chair. It was painted pale blue. A little round table stood beside it. No one occupied it. Clara pointed. He always asked, Has anyone been sitting in that chair alone? Noah followed her gaze. Why that chair? Clara smiled sadly. Come with me. She led them through the main reading room. Several older visitors looked up as Noah passed wearing Henry's coat. One man smiled in recognition. Another lowered his newspaper and nodded respectfully. It seemed Henry's presence still lived in every corner of the building. When they reached the pale blue chair, Clara gently ran her hand across its back. This chair was donated almost 30 years ago. By your grandfather. David looked surprised. Dad donated it? Clara nodded. He built it himself. Noah examined the chair more closely. The paint had faded along the edges. A tiny carved rose decorated the backrest. Elizabeth's favorite flower. Beneath the seat, almost hidden from view, Henry had carved a sentence. Noah knelt to read it. No one sitting here should feel invisible. David closed his eyes. Even a chair had carried one of his father's promises. Clara sat at the nearby table. Henry first noticed this corner when he began writing letters here. He said people who were lonely rarely chose the center of a room, They sat near exits, near windows, at the edges, places where they could watch life without being expected to join it. Every Thursday, Henry placed his writing case on this table. Before writing a single word, he looked toward the little chair. If someone sat there alone, he waited. Sometimes he offered them a newspaper. Sometimes he asked whether the light bothered their eyes. Sometimes he simply sat nearby and wrote quietly. He never forced conversation. He understood loneliness could be shy. Clara smiled. Children especially trusted him. He never spoke to them as though their problems were small. If a child said school was difficult, Henry listened as though they were describing the hardest day in the world. Because to that child, it probably was. Noah looked toward the empty chair. Was there a particular girl? Clara's expression changed. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. There were several. She stood and walked behind the children's reading shelves. David and Noah followed. Clara unlocked a low filing cabinet. Inside were decades of library records, program schedules, volunteer lists, old photographs. She removed a large scrapbook. The cover read, "Fairview Library Memories." The photographs began in the early 1980s. Children's reading groups, holiday parties, summer programs, book drives. Henry appeared in many of them, sometimes dressed as Santa Claus, sometimes repairing shelves, sometimes sitting at a table, helping children write letters to grandparents, always wearing the navy blue coat. Clara stopped at one photograph taken 12 years earlier. It showed Henry at his usual table. The pale blue chair stood beside the window. A little girl sat in it. Her face had turned away from the camera. Only the back of her dark hair was visible. She held a book against her chest. No one else sat near her. Noah's heartbeat quickened. "Who is she?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know. You don't have her name?" She wasn't part of the program. She simply came in some afternoons. Always alone. Always chose that chair. David studied the photograph. Did Dad speak to her? Not at first. Henry knew better than to rush. For weeks, he simply sat at the next table. Then one Thursday, he left a sharpened pencil beside her book. The following week, she left him a small drawing. Clara turned another page. A child's crayon drawing had been carefully preserved beneath clear plastic. It showed a white house, a blue coat, a tall man holding an umbrella over a small girl. Above them, rain fell from dark clouds. At the bottom, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for seeing me." Noah gently touched the edge of the page. Was this from her? Clara nodded. "I believe so." David looked hopeful. "Then she must be the girl." "Maybe," Clara replied. "But there is something you should know." The photograph had been taken 12 years earlier. The same year Henry ordered the special envelope from Whitmore Stationery. The same year he hid the letter in his desk. But Clara had not seen the little girl after that winter. One afternoon, she simply stopped coming. Henry asked about her for months. No one knew her full name. No one knew where she lived. The library required no card for children reading inside. She never checked out a book. There was no record. "Did Dad try to find her?" David asked. Clara gave him a knowing smile. Every Thursday, he visited schools. He asked at churches. He spoke with social workers without revealing too much. But Henry also understood. A child might disappear because an adult had taught her not to trust questions. So he searched gently. Noah looked again at the drawing. Why didn't he mail the letter? He had nowhere to send it. Clara walked back toward the little chair. She reached beneath the round table and found a small brass latch. A shallow compartment opened. Inside lay a thin notebook covered in pale blue cloth. I've kept this exactly where Henry left it. The first page carried Henry's handwriting. Children who sat by the window. Below it were dates, brief descriptions. Nothing that invaded anyone's privacy. Only things Henry had noticed. Boy in red sweater afraid to read aloud. Girl with broken glasses waited for her brother until closing. Child with yellow backpack ate crackers for supper. Quiet girl draws houses but never people inside them. Noah turned several pages. The final entry made him stop. October 14. She asked whether a person could be forgotten while still standing in the room. I told her yes. Then I told her being forgotten was not the same as being unworthy of remembrance. Beneath it, Henry had written, "Write the letter tonight." Noah's eyes filled with tears. This was her. Clara nodded slowly. I think so. David pointed toward the date, October 14th. Clara looked at the calendar hanging near the circulation desk. Tomorrow would be October 14th. Exactly 12 years since Henry made the final entry. Noah looked toward the mysterious girl's drawing, then at the unopened letter. What happened that day? Clara hesitated. Henry never told me everything, but I remember the weather. It rained from morning until evening. The girl came in soaked. She sat in that chair for nearly 4 hours. She didn't read. She didn't draw. She simply watched the front door. Was she waiting for someone? Yes. Who? Clara's voice softened. Her mother. Closing time arrived. The library was nearly empty, but no one came for the girl. Henry refused to leave. Clara called the police. A social worker eventually arrived. The girl's mother had been taken to the hospital after collapsing at work. There was no father listed, no nearby relative. The child was placed temporarily with a foster family. Did you learn her name then? David asked. Only her first name. Clara walked behind the desk and opened another folder. Inside was a faded incident report. Most of it had been legally redacted, but one handwritten line remained visible. Child's first name, Emily. Noah looked disappointed. Emily. The letter says little girl, but we were looking for Emma. David gently corrected him. We weren't looking for any particular name. Not yet. Clara continued. Henry visited the next day. He asked where she had gone. I couldn't tell him. The social worker wasn't permitted to share the address. He left looking heartbroken. That evening, Henry wrote the letter. He ordered the special envelope. He returned to the library every week for nearly a year. But Emily never came back. Noah sat in the little blue chair. He held the sealed envelope against his chest. So Grandpa hid it because he couldn't find her. Clara shook her head. Not exactly. 1 year later, Henry told Clara he had stopped searching for a single child. He had realized something. There would always be another little girl, or boy, sitting at the edge of a room, wondering whether anyone noticed. He could not know which one would need the letter most. So he left it unfinished in one important way. No name, no address, no destination. Clara looked directly at Noah. Henry didn't fail to deliver it. He was waiting for someone else to recognize the right moment. The words settled heavily in Noah's heart. Maybe the girl in the photograph had inspired the letter, but perhaps she wasn't the final recipient. Perhaps Grandpa had written it for every child who felt invisible, and one day, someone would need it more than anyone else. A quiet voice spoke from behind them. Mrs. Bennett. They turned. A young library assistant stood near the front desk. She held a backpack decorated with tiny stars. This was left in the children's room again. Clara Sahil. Emma's. The assistant nodded. She's still in the courtyard. Noah froze. David looked at Clara. Who is Emma? Clara's face softened. An 11-year-old girl. She comes here almost every afternoon. Her mother works late. Emma waits until the evening bus. Does she sit in this chair? Noah asked. Clara glanced toward the pale blue seat. Every day, through the tall window, Noah saw a little girl sitting alone on the courtyard wall. Dark hair, oversized sweater. A book closed beside her. She wasn't reading. She was watching families walk past on the sidewalk. Mothers holding children's hands. Fathers carrying backpacks. Grandparents waiting beside parked cars. No one was waiting for her. Noah looked down at the envelope. 6 words seemed to grow heavier in his hands. For the little girl who believes no one sees her. He whispered, Dad. I think Grandpa's letter just found her. The late afternoon sun stretched long golden shadows across the library courtyard. Children laughed near the small playground across the street. Parents called their sons and daughters home for dinner. Car doors opened. Backpacks were tossed into back seats. On be on. Every child disappeared into the comfort of someone waiting for them, except one, Emma. She remained seated on the old stone wall beneath a maple tree. A paperback book rested quietly beside her. She wasn't reading. She wasn't looking around. She simply watched, almost as though she had learned that watching other people return home was safer than hoping someone might be coming for her. Noah stood silently behind the library window. The unopened envelope felt heavier than it had that morning. 6 simple words. For the little girl who believes no one sees her. He whispered, Dad, she's all alone. David nodded slowly. I know, but Grandpa would have told us something. What? He never assumed. He always listened first. Clara smiled gently. Henry used to tell the volunteers, never try to solve someone's loneliness before you've learned its name. Noah looked back toward Emma. So, we don't give her the letter today? Clara shook her head. No, you meet her first. You earn the right. The three of them walked outside. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and freshly cut grass. Emma noticed them approaching. She immediately picked up her backpack, not because she was afraid, because she expected they wanted the bench. She quietly stepped aside. I'm sorry. You can sit here. Her voice was soft, almost practiced, as though apologizing had become a habit. No, sweetheart. Clara smiled warmly. We were actually hoping to sit with you. Emma looked surprised. Me? Yes, if that's okay. She hesitated, then nodded once. Noah sat on the opposite end of the stone wall, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. Grandpa would have done exactly the same. For nearly a minute, nobody spoke. Cars passed. Leaves drifted lazily through the air. Emma gently brushed one from her sleeve. Finally, Noah smiled. I like your book. Emma looked down. It's my favorite. What is it? Charlotte's Web. Noah grinned. Grandpa loved that one. She looked up for the first time. Really? He said every child should read it. Emma smiled faintly. So does Mrs. Bennet. That tiny smile lasted only a second. Then it disappeared, almost as quickly as it had come. David noticed. He had seen that expression before. On veterans, on widowers, on children carrying worries far older than their years. Do you come here every day? Emma nodded. After school, until your mom gets off work? Another nod. She's usually late. She works at the hospital. Clara added quietly, your mother works very hard. Emma smiled proudly. She says helping people is worth being tired. Noah laughed softly. Your mom sounds a little like my grandpa. Emma looked curious. The man in the picture? You've seen his picture? She pointed toward the library window. It's on the wall. The nice old man. Mrs. Bennet says he used to write letters. Noah smiled. He wrote thousands. Emma looked amazed. Why? So people wouldn't forget. That someone cared. Emma stared at the ground. After several moments, she quietly asked, did it work? Noah blinked. What do you mean? The letters. Did people stop being lonely? No one answered immediately. Finally, David smiled. I don't think loneliness disappears, but I think it gets lighter. When someone shares it, Emma nodded slowly, almost as though she understood more than most adults. The library clock chimed 5 times. Emma looked automatically toward the parking lot. Every evening, exactly 5 o'clock. She looked. Every evening. No one came. Noah noticed. So, your mom usually comes around 6? Emma nodded. If she's not called into surgery, you wait here by yourself? I'm okay. I'm used to it. Those last 4 words hurt Noah far more than she realized. I'm used to it. Grandpa would have heard the sadness hidden inside those words. Noah heard it too. A gust of wind scattered leaves across the courtyard. Emma quickly stood to catch a folded drawing before it blew away. She tucked it carefully inside her notebook. Noah noticed dozens of papers inside. You draw? She nodded. Sometimes. Can I see? She hesitated, then slowly handed him the notebook. Every page contained houses, porches, trees, families eating dinner, grandparents rocking on front porches, children baking cookies, people holding hands. Almost every picture included windows glowing warmly from inside. But one thing immediately stood out. There was always one empty chair. Always. Noah gently turned another page. Another family. Another empty chair. Another. And another. Every drawing. The same. Emma. Why is there always an empty chair? She looked embarrassed. I don't know. You do. She looked away. She paused. My teacher says every picture tells the truth. After a long silence, Emma whispered, my dad used to sit there. The words were so quiet. They almost disappeared beneath the rustling leaves. David felt his chest tighten. When did he pass away? I was 4. I don't remember much. But Mom says he always came home before dinner. Emma smiled sadly. I still set the table for 3 sometimes. Noah couldn't speak. He simply closed the notebook, very carefully, as though it contained something fragile. Because it did. A child's heart. Clara gently changed the subject. Have you ever met Mr. Whitmore, the man who owns the stationery shop? Emma shook her head. No, I only come to the library. I like it here. Nobody asks questions. Again. Noah remembered Grandpa's words. People often hid their loneliness in places where no one expected conversation. Just then, a tired blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Emma smiled immediately. Me mom. She hurried toward the car. Halfway there, she suddenly stopped, turned around, and walked back. She looked directly at Noah. I like talking to you. Noah smiled. I like talking to you too. Emma reached into her backpack, pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper, and handed it to him. For you. Before Noah could unfold it, she was already running toward the car. A woman wearing hospital scrubs stepped out. Her shoulders looked exhausted. Yet the moment she saw Emma, her face lit up. She hugged her daughter tightly, exactly as though no amount of exhaustion could keep her from that embrace. Noah smiled. She really loves her. Clara nodded. More than anything, the blue sedan disappeared down the street. Noah unfolded the paper. It wasn't a note. It was another drawing. A little blue chair, a library window, an old man writing letters, and beside him, a young man carrying a navy blue coat. Above both figures, Emma had written carefully in pencil, "You looked at me instead of past me." Noah felt tears sting his eyes. Grandpa had once received a drawing that said, "Thank you for seeing me." Now, years later, another lonely child had unknowingly written almost the same words. David looked over Noah's shoulder. He smiled through misty eyes. Dad would have loved that. As they prepared to leave, Clara suddenly remembered something. There is someone else you should meet. Who? A retired school teacher. She taught here for 40 years. She once told Henry something that he carried with him for the rest of his life. What was it? Clara smiled. He always said, "I learned more about lonely children from Mrs. Eleanor Brooks than from anyone else." She handed Noah a small index card. Written neatly across the front was an address. Eleanor Brooks, Willow Creek Farm. Clara looked toward the quiet road beyond the library. If anyone knows why Henry wrote that letter, it may be Eleanor. That evening, back at the White House, Noah placed Emma's drawing beside the unopened envelope. 2 drawings, 12 years apart, 2 different little girls, both thanking someone, simply for seeing them. He stared at Grandpa's words once more. For the little girl who believes no one sees her. For the first time, Noah wasn't sure whether the letter belonged to Emma, or whether Grandpa's journey still had one more lesson waiting. The next morning, a thin layer of mist drifted across the country roads outside Fairview. The farther Noah and David drove from town, the quieter the world became. Open fields stretched toward the horizon. Old wooden fences bordered golden pastures. Rows of maple trees lined the winding road like silent guardians welcoming every traveler. Neither father nor son spoke very much. Emma's drawing rested safely inside Henry's writing box. Beside it, the unopened envelope. Every mile seemed to carry them one step closer to understanding why Henry had never mailed it. Nearly 40 minutes later, a weathered wooden sign appeared beside the road. Willow Creek Farm. Fresh white paint surrounded the carefully carved letters. Wildflowers bloomed beneath the sign. Beyond it stood a small farmhouse wrapped in climbing roses. An old red barn leaned gently against the morning sky. Chickens wandered freely through the yard. 2 golden retrievers lifted their heads as the truck rolled slowly up the gravel driveway. They barked once, then wagged their tails, almost as though they recognized visitors who had come in kindness. Before Noah could knock, the front door opened. A petite, elderly woman stepped onto the porch. Her silver hair was neatly tied into a loose bun. She wore denim overalls beneath a knitted, cream-colored sweater. Despite the lines on her face, her blue eyes sparkled with warmth. She smiled. "You must be Henry's boys." David laughed softly. "It seems everyone already knows why we're here." Eleanor Brooks smiled. Oh, Henry had a way of preparing people. She welcomed them inside. The farmhouse smelled of cinnamon bread and fresh apples. Every shelf overflowed with books. Framed photographs of children filled nearly every wall. Graduation pictures, wedding pictures, military portraits, family photographs sent by former students. Noah stopped in front of one wall. There must be hundreds. Eleanor nodded proudly. 817. David blinked. You counted? I taught every one of them. And every Christmas. They still send me cards. She noticed Henry's fountain pen, then the old navy coat. Her smile softened. He finally trusted someone else with them. Noah looked surprised. You knew about the coat? Oh yes. It wasn't just a coat. It was Henry's courage. They settled around the kitchen table. Fresh biscuits cooled beside a jar of homemade blackberry jam. Eleanor poured tea. For several minutes, nobody mentioned the letter. Instead, they talked about Henry, how he always arrived 10 minutes early, how he repaired broken classroom chairs without being asked, how he secretly paid for school lunches, how every January he donated winter coats anonymously. David listened quietly. Each story revealed another part of the father he had never fully known. Finally, Noah placed the unopened envelope gently on the table. We found this. Eleanor looked at it for a long time. She did not touch it. She simply smiled sadly. So, he never mailed it. No. I wondered. You knew he wrote it? I knew he planned to, but Henry never showed me the finished letter. He only asked me one question. What was it? Eleanor folded her hands. He asked, how do you help a child who has already decided they don't matter? The kitchen became silent. Even the ticking wall clock seemed louder. Eleanor continued. I didn't answer immediately, because teachers ask themselves that question every year. She looked out the kitchen window toward the old apple trees. Eventually, I told him something my first principal taught me. Children rarely believe what you tell them about themselves. They believe what your actions quietly repeat. If adults ignore them, they believe they're invisible. If adults listen, they begin believing they matter. Noah slowly nodded. That's exactly what Grandpa did. Eleanor smiled. Yes, he listened, better than almost anyone. She stood and walked toward a tall oak cabinet. From the top shelf, she removed an old blue binder. Its edges had become worn from years of use. Across the front, written in careful handwriting, were 3 simple words. Seen and heard. What is it? My teaching journal. I wrote down moments I never wanted to forget. She opened the binder carefully. Each page contained memories, not grades. Note attendance. Moments. A frightened first grader finally reading aloud. A shy boy singing during the Christmas concert. A lonely child laughing for the first time. Henry's name appeared often. One page stopped Eleanor completely. She smiled. I've been looking for this. The date, 12 years earlier. Only 3 weeks before Henry ordered the special envelope. She began reading aloud. Henry visited after school today. He spent nearly an hour helping repair the reading corner. Before leaving, he asked about the little girl who always eats lunch alone. Noah leaned forward. Did she have a name? Eleanor nodded slowly. Emily. David exchanged a glance with Noah. The same name Clara had found in the library records. Eleanor continued reading. Henry said, no child should spend every lunch believing no one notices an empty chair. Noah felt goosebumps. Another empty chair, just like Emma's drawings. What happened to Emily? Noah asked quietly. Eleanor closed the journal. She transferred schools. Not long afterward, did Henry ever find her? No. He tried, but children's lives sometimes change faster than adults can follow. She smiled sadly. For weeks, he kept asking whether I'd heard anything. One afternoon, Henry stood beneath the old oak tree outside the school. He watched children being picked up, one after another. Parents waved. Grandparents hugged grandchildren. Cars pulled away. Soon, only one child remained. Emily, standing alone with her backpack. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Nearly an hour passed before a social worker arrived. Henry watched the entire time. He never forgot it. He cried that day. Eleanor whispered. I'd never seen him cry before. David looked down. His father had hidden that pain from everyone at home. He told me, I can fix broken fences. I can repair porches. I can even mend old chairs. But I don't know how to repair the feeling inside a child who believes no one is coming. The room fell silent once more. After several moments, Eleanor reached inside the journal again. This time, She removed a folded photograph. It showed Henry standing beside the school's reading corner. Around him sat half a dozen children listening to a story. Most smiled toward the camera, except one, a little girl near the window, dark hair, quiet eyes, watching Henry instead of the book. Emily. Noah carefully examined the photograph. Something felt strangely familiar. The way she held the book, the oversized sweater, the thoughtful expression. It reminded him of Emma, not because they looked alike, because loneliness often looked the same. Eleanor noticed him staring. You're wondering whether Emma is the girl. Noah nodded. I don't know anymore. Eleanor smiled gently. I don't think that's the right question. What do you mean? She looked directly at him. Henry eventually stopped asking. Where's Emily? He started asking. Who needs this letter today? The words settled into Noah's heart. Perhaps. The search had never been about finding one missing child. Perhaps it had always been about recognizing the child standing alone today. Before they left, Eleanor disappeared upstairs. Several minutes later, she returned carrying a small wooden box wrapped in faded blue ribbon. She placed it in front of Noah. Henry left this with me. For me? No. For whoever continued writing after him. Noah slowly untied the ribbon. Inside lay dozens of unused sheets of ivory paper, exactly like the paper inside the unopened envelope. On top rested a handwritten note. If you're reading this, don't try to become me. Simply notice the people everyone else walks past. That's where every letter truly begins. Henry Collins. Tears filled David's eyes. For years, he had believed his father left behind letters. Now he realized Henry had actually left behind a way of seeing the world. As Noah carefully returned the note to the box, something small slipped from between the pages. A faded library checkout card. Across the top, written in blue ink, was a single address. Not a home, not a school. Fairview Children's Hospital. Eleanor looked surprised. I've never seen that before. On the back, Henry had written only one sentence. She said hospitals are where people disappear. Noah looked at David. Emma's mother worked at Fairview Children's Hospital. Neither of them spoke, but they were both thinking the same thing. Maybe their journey wasn't over yet. Maybe the next clue had been waiting. In the very place where Emma spent every evening waiting for her mother to finish helping strangers. Monday arrived beneath a sky the color of soft silver. Rain tapped gently against the windshield as Noah and David drove toward Fairview Children's Hospital. Neither of them spoke very much. Henry's old writing box rested safely on the back seat. Inside, the unopened letter, Emma's drawing, the faded library photograph, Henry's note, and the small hospital card Eleanor had discovered hidden between the pages. It felt less like a collection of memories now, and more like pieces of a puzzle Henry had quietly left behind. The hospital stood on a hill overlooking the town. Its wide glass entrance reflected the gray morning sky. Children in colorful raincoats hurried through the automatic doors, while nurses greeted families with warm smiles. Despite the sadness that often lived inside hospitals, there was also something else. Hope. Hope walked these hallways every single day. As Noah stepped inside, he noticed something immediately. Near the reception desk sat a small wooden bookshelf. Children were reading while waiting for appointments. Crayon, picture books, stuffed animals, a quiet corner built entirely for comfort. A brass plaque rested on the side. It read, "Donated by Henry Collins, in loving memory of Elizabeth Collins." David stopped walking. Dad built this too? A volunteer arranging books overheard him. She smiled. Oh yes. He came every Thursday. Thursday. Again. Every important clue seemed to lead back to Thursdays. He volunteered here? Noah asked. The volunteer nodded. For years, he never wanted recognition. He simply read stories to children while they waited. She laughed softly. Sometimes parents cried more than the children. David smiled. That sounds like my father. The volunteer introduced herself. My name is Susan. I've worked here 20 years. The moment she heard Henry's name, her face brightened. I've been wondering if someone would come. Noah and David exchanged another surprised glance. It seemed Henry had quietly prepared people everywhere he went. Susan led them toward the children's reading room. Bright murals covered the walls. Colorful fish swam across painted oceans. Hot air balloons floated among smiling clouds. Tiny chairs surrounded circular tables. In one corner stood a familiar object, a pale blue wooden chair, almost identical to the one inside the library. Noah walked toward it slowly. His fingertips brushed the smooth wood. Underneath the seat, another sentence had been carved. Every child deserves someone who waits with them. David closed his eyes. "Dad," he whispered, "you were everywhere." Susan smiled. "Henry built 3 of these. One for the library, one here, and one somewhere else." "Do you know where?" She shook her head. "He never told me." Another mystery. Another piece waiting to be discovered. Susan opened an old storage cabinet. "I think there's something you'll want to see." She removed a large scrapbook filled with photographs. Henry appeared throughout its pages. Reading fairy tales, building toy shelves, fixing broken wheelchairs, blowing bubbles outside the pediatric wing. Never posing, always working, always smiling. Then Noah stopped on one particular photograph. Henry sat beside a little girl wearing a knitted pink hat. She couldn't have been older than 6. She smiled up at him while holding a coloring book. On the page, she had drawn a little white house, a blue coat, and flowers beneath a window. Elizabeth's roses. When was this taken? Susan checked the date. 12 years ago. Again, 12 years. Everything kept returning to the same year. Who was she? Susan frowned. "I honestly don't remember. We saw hundreds of children. But," she looked closer, "I do remember something." Henry visited one afternoon after learning a child had been waiting alone for nearly 6 hours. David looked surprised. "Alone?" Susan nodded sadly. Her mother worked here. There was an emergency. The little girl stayed in the waiting room all afternoon. Henry sat with her. He read stories. They colored together. He never asked why she was there. He simply stayed. Noah's heart skipped. Did the girl's mother ever arrive? Eventually. She cried when she realized someone had kept her daughter company. Susan smiled softly. "I still remember what Henry told her. Never apologize for loving people so much that you're exhausted. Your daughter already knows she's loved. She only needed someone to help her wait." The words settled deeply inside Noah. Help her wait. Emma waited every evening. Emily had waited outside school. Henry never tried to erase waiting. He simply refused to let children wait alone. Susan continued turning pages, then suddenly paused. "Oh, I forgot about this." She removed a folded volunteer schedule. Henry's name appeared nearly every Thursday. Beside one date, someone had written in red ink, "Canceled." The date matched exactly. The date Henry had written in his notebook. "Write the letter tonight." Noah frowned. "He never came?" Susan shook her head. "No. It was the only Thursday he missed all year." "What happened?" Susan thought for a moment. "I remember receiving a phone call," he said. "There's one child I have to find today." David slowly exhaled. Dad wasn't sick. He wasn't resting. He was searching for Emily. Susan reached into another folder. "I almost forgot. He left something with us." She handed Noah a sealed envelope, smaller than Henry's. Across the front, Henry had written, "If the child is already smiling, don't give her this." Inside was not a letter, only a single sentence. "Find the one who waits quietly without asking anyone to stay." Noah stared at the page. Emma. Every afternoon. She waited, without complaining, without asking, without expecting anyone to notice. David whispered, "I think Dad already knew." "But," Noah replied, "he never met Emma." "No." David smiled gently. He simply understood children. As they thanked Susan and prepared to leave, an elderly janitor quietly approached them. His uniform was faded, his gray beard neatly trimmed. He glanced toward Henry's navy coat, then smiled. "I'd know that coat anywhere. My name's Walter. I worked with Henry." "You knew him?" Walter chuckled. "He always made me take coffee breaks. I hated taking breaks." He insisted. Walter leaned on his broom. "You know, there was one little girl he worried about more than all the others." "Emily?" Walter shook his head. "No. Her mother worked nights. She waited after school. Every evening." Noah felt his heartbeat quicken. "What was her name?" Walter closed his eyes, trying to remember. Finally, he smiled. "It wasn't Emily. It was Emma. The world seemed to stop. Rain continued tapping gently against the hospital windows. Noah stared at Walter. Emma? Walter nodded confidently. I remember because she used to draw stars. Always stars. And she carried a little blue backpack. Noah slowly reached into Henry's writing box. He removed Emma's drawing from the library. In the upper corner, almost too small to notice, tiny stars decorated the page, exactly like the backpack Walter had described. David whispered, "May God." Walter frowned. "Is something wrong?" Noah smiled through tears. "No, I think. We finally found the little girl." The rain had stopped by Wednesday afternoon. After 3 days of gray skies, sunlight finally returned to Fairview. Golden leaves shimmered beneath the warm October light. For Noah, everything suddenly felt different. The search was over. Or perhaps, the search had only been preparing him for what came next. For 12 years, one sealed envelope had waited patiently, not for a certain address, not for a particular mailbox, but for the right heart. Back at Henry's house, the old writing desk stood beside the living room window, exactly where Henry had always kept it. Noah carefully placed the unopened envelope upon its polished surface. He sat quietly in Grandpa's chair. The room was silent, except for the ticking grandfather clock. David entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Neither man reached for the letter. Not yet. Finally, David spoke. "You know, when I was a little boy, I thought Dad knew everything." He smiled sadly. "Then I became a teenager, and I thought he understood nothing." Noah laughed softly. David continued, "Now, I realize I never stopped discovering who he really was." He looked at the envelope, and somehow, he's still teaching us. Noah nodded. "I'm afraid to open it. Sewing. What if we're wrong? What if it wasn't meant for Emma?" David looked toward Henry's favorite chair. "I don't think Dad would have asked us to be certain. He would have asked us to be kind." Those words settled gently into Noah's heart. Kindness first, certainty later. That had always been Henry's way. That afternoon, Noah drove to the library alone. He didn't bring the letter, only Emma's drawing. He wanted to see her once more, without expectations, without answers, simply to listen. Emma sat in her usual place beneath the maple tree. A stack of homework rested beside her. She smiled when she saw Noah. "You came back. I said I would." Most adults forgot promises. Emma noticed that immediately. They talked about ordinary things. School, books, the changing colors of the trees. Emma loved autumn. "It makes everything look warm," she said, "even when it's cold." After a while, Noah asked quietly, "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Have you ever felt like people couldn't really see you?" Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked across the parking lot where families were arriving. Then she spoke so softly Noah almost missed it. "I think they see me. They just don't notice me." There was a difference. Henry would have understood it immediately. Being seen and being noticed. One required eyesight. The other required love. Emma continued, "When Mom works, everyone says she's helping people. I know that's true. I'm proud of her." She smiled. "But sometimes, I wish someone would ask, who's helping her little girl while she's helping everyone else?" Noah felt his throat tighten. No child should have to wonder that. Emma looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I talked too much." "No." Noah smiled. "You've probably spent a long time not talking enough." She laughed quietly. "I guess." A breeze carried several maple leaves onto the stone wall. Emma carefully gathered one bright red leaf. She placed it between the pages of her book. "I save one every October." "Why?" "So I can remember." "Remember what?" "That beautiful things don't stay forever." Noah smiled. "My grandpa would have liked that." Emma looked toward the library. "I wish I could have met him." "So do I." Just then, Mrs. Bennet stepped outside carrying a small tray of hot chocolate. She handed 1 cup to Emma, another to Noah. "I thought today called for something warm." Emma grinned. "Thank you." Mrs. Bennet smiled. "You're very welcome," as Emma quietly sipped her drink. Mrs. Bennet walked a few steps away with Noah. She spoke in almost a whisper. She had another difficult morning. What happened? A class presentation. No one picked her to join their group. Noah looked toward Emma. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She simply sat quietly, as though disappointment had become something familiar. Mrs. Bennet sighed. She never complains. I almost wish she would. Noah suddenly remembered something Henry had once written inside one of his notebooks. The quietest children often carry the loudest pain. That evening, Noah returned home. He found David sitting beside Henry's desk. The envelope rested exactly where they had left it. Neither of them spoke. Instead, David slowly placed Henry's fountain pen beside it. Ready? Noah took a deep breath. I think so. He picked up the envelope with both hands. The paper felt smooth, almost new, as though time itself had protected it. Very carefully, he slid one finger beneath the old seal. It released with the softest sound. No ripping, no tearing. Almost as though Henry had been waiting beside them all along. Inside rested a single sheet of ivory paper. Beautiful, simple, written entirely in Henry Collins's familiar blue ink. At the very top, there was no name, only one sentence. To the little girl who believes no one sees her. David closed his eyes. Noah began to read aloud. If this letter has reached you, then someone has already done the hardest part. Someone noticed you. That means you were never invisible after all. Noah stopped reading. Neither of them could speak for several seconds. Henry's first sentence wasn't trying to solve loneliness. It simply reminded the child that someone had already chosen to see them. He continued, You may think grown-ups are too busy to notice when you're quiet. Sometimes that's true. Adults become tired. They worry about bills, work, sickness, and tomorrow. But their busyness is never proof that you are unimportant. David quietly wiped away a tear. Noah kept reading. One day, you will meet people who walk past without looking up. Please, don't become one of them. Look for the child sitting alone, the old man eating by himself, the tired mother carrying too many bags. Notice them, because being noticed can save a life long before anyone realizes it needed saving. The room fell completely silent. Even the old grandfather clock seemed to pause between each tick. Near the bottom of the page, Henry's handwriting became slightly less steady. The ink grew lighter. Perhaps he had been tired. Perhaps he already knew his time was growing short. The final paragraph read, I may never know your name. You may never know mine. That doesn't matter. Love doesn't always arrive through family. Sometimes it arrives through strangers who simply refuse to let another human being feel forgotten. If today has been lonely, please believe tomorrow has not finished looking for you yet. Noah's voice broke. He could barely continue. Only one line remained. Henry had written it larger than all the others. You matter, even on the days you feel unseen. Nothing else. No signature. No farewell. No explanation. Only those words. David sat in complete silence. Finally, he smiled. Dad never finished the letter. Noah looked surprised. What do you mean? He never signed it. Noah stared at the blank space beneath the final sentence. For the first time, he understood. Henry had intentionally left the signature blank because the person delivering the letter would finish it. The next afternoon, Noah placed the letter back inside its envelope. He slipped Emma's drawing behind it, then tucked both carefully into Henry's writing box. He drove toward the library. His heart beat faster with every mile. Not because he was nervous, because after 12 years, a letter was finally going home. Emma was already waiting beneath the maple tree. She smiled the moment she saw him. You came back. Noah smiled warmly. I promised I would. He sat beside her, holding the envelope gently in both hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Noah quietly asked, Emma, if someone wrote you a letter, years before you ever met them, would you want to hear it? Emma looked at the envelope, then at Noah, her eyes filled with quiet curiosity. She whispered, Yes. Thursday afternoon arrived with the gentle warmth of early autumn. The sky stretched endlessly blue above Fairview. Golden sunlight filtered through the maple branches outside the library, scattering dancing patches of light across the stone walkway. It was the kind of afternoon Henry Collins had always loved. Quiet, unhurried, ordinary enough that people almost missed how beautiful it truly was. Emma sat beneath the familiar maple tree. Her backpack rested beside her. A half-finished homework assignment lay open across her lap. Every few minutes, she looked toward the library doors, not because she expected anyone, Because Noah had promised he would return. For Emma, promises mattered. Too many adults had broken them without realizing they had. Noah hadn't. When she finally saw his truck pull into the parking lot, a smile spread across her face before she could stop it. She stood immediately. "You came. I told you I would." He smiled. "I've brought something for you." Emma noticed the old wooden writing box tucked beneath his arm. "The box again?" "Yes. It belonged to my grandpa. The man who wrote letters? The very same one." They sat together beneath the tree, not on the bench, on the soft grass beneath the falling leaves. David and Clara remained several yards away, giving them privacy. Neither wanted to interrupt what was about to happen. Noah carefully removed the cream-colored envelope. Emma stared at it. "It's old." "It is. Very old." He handed it to her. "I think this belongs to you." Emma looked confused. "My name isn't on it." "No, it never was." She turned the envelope over. No address. No stamp. Only 6 familiar words written in blue ink. "For the little girl who believes no one sees her." Emma whispered them aloud, then became very quiet. Almost too quiet. Noah gently asked, "Would you like me to read it?" Emma nodded. "I think I'd like that." The breeze slowed. Even the birds seemed quieter. Leaves drifted softly around them as Noah unfolded Henry's letter. He began reading, slowly, carefully, every word exactly as Henry had written it. "To the little girl who believes no one sees her. If this letter has reached you, then someone has already done the hardest part. Someone noticed you. That means you were never invisible after all." Emma lowered her eyes. She wrapped both hands around the envelope. Noah continued, "Adults sometimes become busy. Busy people forget important things. But forgetting to notice you does not mean you are unworthy of being loved." Emma blinked several times. Tiny tears gathered quietly in her eyes. She didn't wipe them away. She simply listened. Nearby, Clara quietly stepped onto the library porch. She wasn't alone. Arthur Whitmore had arrived carrying a small paper bag from his stationery shop. Eleanor Brooks stood beside him. Walter from the hospital leaned gently against his cane. Susan arrived moments later. None of them interrupted. They simply stood together beneath the trees, listening. Every one of them had carried a piece of Henry's story. Now, the final chapter belonged to Emma. Noah reached the middle of the letter. His voice remained calm, though tears had begun filling his own eyes. "One day, you will discover that the strongest people are not those who never feel lonely. They are the ones who continue making room for others, even after loneliness has visited them." Emma looked toward Noah. Her voice trembled. Did he really write this? So long ago? Yes. He never knew me. No, he didn't. She looked back at the letter. Then, how did he know? Noah smiled gently. "I don't think Grandpa knew you. I think he knew how loneliness feels." Emma nodded slowly, almost as though a question she'd carried for years had finally received its answer. Noah continued reading. "If today has been difficult, please don't decide your whole future because of one lonely afternoon. Tomorrow has rescued more hearts than yesterday ever could." Emma's shoulders began to shake, not with loud sobs, with quiet relief, the kind that arrives only after carrying something heavy for far too long. She whispered, "I always thought something was wrong with me." Noah immediately shook his head. "No, there never was." Emma looked toward the families leaving the library. "I thought, if people forgot me, it must mean I wasn't important." Before Noah could answer, a gentle voice spoke behind them. It was Eleanor. "No, sweetheart. It usually means the adults around you were carrying burdens you couldn't see." Emma looked at her. Eleanor smiled. "When I was your age, I believed the very same thing." Arthur stepped forward. "So did I." Walter chuckled softly. "I certainly did. Onne. Every adult standing beneath the maple tree admitted they had once felt invisible too. Not because no one loved them, because life had become noisy, complicated. Bosu. Emma looked around in disbelief. "You too?" Clara smiled. "Especially me." For the first time in her young life, Emma realized loneliness was not proof that she was different. It was something many hearts quietly carried. Noah read the final paragraph. "I may never know your name. You may never know mine. But if these words reach you, please remember one thing. You matter. even on the days you feel unseen. Silence followed. No one hurried to speak. The wind gently lifted a few maple leaves into the air. Emma carefully folded the letter, held it against her heart, closed her eyes. After a long moment, she whispered something so softly that only Noah heard. "I think I've been waiting for this my whole life." Noah smiled through tears. So was Grandpa. Emma looked confused. He was? "I think. He spent 12 years waiting for the right person." She hugged the envelope tightly. "I'll keep it forever." Just then, Emma's mother hurried across the parking lot, wearing her hospital scrubs. She looked exhausted. "I'm so sorry I'm late." Then she noticed the crowd. Emma ran toward her. Without saying a word, she wrapped both arms around her mother, held her tighter than usual, much tighter. Her mother smiled. "What's gotten into you?" Emma looked up, tears still shining in her eyes. "I know something now." "What is it?" Emma smiled. "I'm not invisible anymore." Her mother looked toward Noah, toward David, toward the elderly friends standing beneath the maple tree. Though no one explained anything, she somehow understood. She quietly mouthed 2 simple words. "Thank you." As the sun began setting, people slowly drifted home. Arthur returned to his stationery shop, Walter to the hospital, Eleanor to Willow Creek Farm. Clara closed the library doors for the evening. Only Noah remained beneath the maple tree, looking at the empty chair by the window. Then, an idea quietly entered his heart, an idea Henry himself would have loved. He smiled. Tomorrow, the letter story would not end. It would begin again. The first snow of winter arrived 6 weeks later. Tiny white flakes drifted silently over Fairview. The little white house at the end of Maple Street looked exactly as it had when Henry Collins still lived there. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Elizabeth's rose garden slept beneath a blanket of snow. The old porch swing moved slightly in the winter breeze. It was simply another quiet home. But to the people of Fairview, it had become something else. A place where kindness never stopped growing. On the first Saturday of December, neighbors began arriving one by one. Arthur carried boxes filled with handmade stationery. Eleanor brought homemade cinnamon bread. Walter arrived with hot coffee for everyone. Susan came pushing a cart stacked with children's books. Mrs. Bennet carried baskets overflowing with colored pencils and blank cards. Soon, the living room filled with laughter, exactly the way Henry always hoped it would. Emma arrived holding her mother's hand. She no longer waited alone outside the library every afternoon. Her mother had rearranged her schedule whenever possible. On the days she couldn't, Mrs. Bennet or one of the volunteers stayed with Emma. No one had planned it. It simply happened, because once people truly noticed someone, they rarely forgot them again. Emma walked quietly toward Henry's writing desk. The old fountain pen rested beside a fresh stack of ivory paper. She looked at Noah. "Can I?" He smiled. "I think Grandpa would have insisted." Emma carefully dipped the fountain pen into the bottle of blue ink. She hesitated for a moment, then began writing. Her handwriting was still uneven. Some letters leaned too far. Others were too small. But every word came from her heart. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, placed it inside a cream-colored envelope. Across the front, she wrote, "For the child who thinks nobody remembers their birthday." Noah stared at the envelope. It looked remarkably similar to Grandpa's, not because of the handwriting, because of the hope it carried. Arthur quietly wiped away a tear. It begins again. That afternoon, every volunteer wrote one anonymous letter. No names, no addresses, only hope. Some were written for the boy who eats lunch alone, the girl who misses her father, the child who thinks being quiet means nobody cares, the teenager who feels forgotten, the grandmother spending her first Christmas alone, the veteran who hasn't heard someone say thank you in years. Every envelope carried compassion instead of assumptions. Henry had taught them that. When evening arrived, Emma asked Noah something unexpected. "How did your grandpa always know what to write?" Noah smiled. "I don't think he always did. He just started by listening." Emma thought about that for a moment. "So, the letter wasn't magic?" "No. The person who noticed someone first. That was the miracle." Emma smiled. "I want to do that. I know you will." Winter slowly passed. Spring returned to Fairview. The maple trees filled with green once again. The story of Henry's unopened letter quietly spread beyond the town. Not through television, not through newspapers, but through people. One person told another, then another, then another. Within a year, teachers from neighboring towns began asking Noah for copies of Henry's letter. School counselors requested permission to read it to children struggling with loneliness. Hospitals placed handwritten encouragement cards beside pediatric beds. Libraries created letters of hope corners, where visitors could write anonymous notes to strangers. Noah never charged anyone. Henry wouldn't have. Hope was never something to sell. By the second year, volunteers from across the state gathered every October, not for speeches, not for ceremonies, but to write letters, thousands of them, each beginning differently, yet carrying the same promise. You matter. Emma never missed a gathering. As she grew older, she became one of the first volunteers to arrive. She always chose the smallest children to sit beside, never because they asked, because she remembered what it felt like to wait quietly. Years passed. The little girl beneath the maple tree became a young woman. She studied education at college. On graduation day, she returned to Fairview wearing her cap and gown. Her first stop wasn't home. It wasn't the school. It wasn't even the library. She walked directly to Henry's house. Noah was trimming Elizabeth's roses. He smiled the moment he saw her. "You did it." Emma laughed. "I promised I would." She handed him a small gift. Inside was a brass nameplate, beautifully engraved. Henry Collins' writing room. Below it, a second line. "Every child deserves one letter." Noah couldn't speak. Together, they mounted the plaque beside Henry's old writing room. From that day forward, the room remained open every Thursday afternoon. Anyone could enter. Anyone could sit. Anyone could write a letter to someone who needed hope. There were no rules. Only one request framed above Henry's desk. Before you write, notice someone. The tradition continued for decades. Children who once received letters returned as adults to write letters of their own. Some became teachers. Some became nurses. Some became fathers and mothers. Some simply became kinder neighbors. Henry never met most of them, yet his handwriting had quietly touched every one of their lives. Nearly 25 years later, Emma stood in front of a classroom for the first time as a teacher. Among her students sat a shy little boy. He never raised his hand. He ate lunch alone. He always chose the chair nearest the window. One rainy afternoon, Emma quietly placed a cream-colored envelope inside his backpack. Across the front, she wrote only 6 words. "For the boy who feels forgotten." She smiled, not because she expected to change the world that day, because someone had once done exactly the same for her. That evening, Emma visited Maple Street. The old White House still stood proudly beneath the maple trees. The roses continued blooming every spring. The porch swing still welcomed visitors. The writing room glowed warmly through the front window. Inside, a young father helped his daughter write her first letter to a lonely neighbor. An elderly widow carefully addressed an envelope to a soldier she had never met. A teenager folded a card for his grandfather. Noah quietly refilled Henry's fountain pen with fresh blue ink. Some traditions deserved to last forever. Before leaving, Emma paused beside Henry's photograph. She gently touched the corner of the frame, then whispered the words she had waited years to say. "Thank you for noticing me." Outside, a gentle breeze carried maple leaves across the front yard. The porch light glowed warmly against the evening sky. Somewhere nearby, children laughed. Neighbors waved to one another. Someone carried homemade soup across the street to an elderly couple. Another volunteer delivered a handwritten note to a hospital room. Kindness continued moving, quietly, patiently, one heart at a time. Henry Collins never became famous. His name never appeared in history books. No monuments were built in his honor. But every Thursday, somewhere, someone wrote a letter because of him. And somewhere else, someone who believed they had been forgotten, opened an envelope, and discovered that hope had finally learned their name.